What do we know about the Delta variant? The main mode of transmission of COVID 19 and all its known variants, including Delta, is airborne transmission. An infected individual will exhale infectious particles into the surrounding air. The particles may then be inhaled by other people in the room. Once the particles reach the airways of an exposed person, they start searching for cells to infect. Once they find the right host cells, viral particles start to make copies of themselves and replicate to increase their number. A PCR test like the saliva test we have here at UIUC can detect the virus and give a quantitative measure of how much virus is inside the body. We call this viral load. Researchers may collect daily samples from infected individuals to measure the viral load as a function of disease progression. Each day, they can report the viral load. By connecting these measurements, we get a picture of what the viral dynamics look like. So, how does the virus dynamics for different types of COVID strains look like? Let's take a look. For the ancestral strain that was first detected in Wuhan in 2019, the virus becomes detectable about 2 days after exposure. It continues to replicate, and the individual may become infectious around 3 to 4 days after exposure. The virus continues to increase, and the individual reaches peak infectivity around 4 to 5 days after exposure. After reaching the peak, the viral load starts to decrease, but shortly after the peak, the individual starts showing symptoms. That happens around 5 days after exposure. These symptoms may vary from cough to fever to diarrhea, as you all know. Later, the viral load continued to decrease gradually, and individuals on average become no longer infectious after about a week from exposure. They may continue to test positive nonetheless. Delta, on the other hand, is a little tricky. It stays low in the body for about 3 days after exposure, and it becomes detectable between 3 to 4 days after exposure. But when it starts to replicate, it does that very fast. The virus load becomes about 100,000 times larger over just one day. Compared to the ancestral strain, it was shown that the viral load in Delta on day one after detection is 1,000 times larger than the viral load in the ancestral strain at the same time. This is one reason why, if you are unvaccinated, you have to undergo frequent rapid testing that can tell you soon enough if you have been infected or not. This initial boost that Delta has allows the virus to reach higher peak viral load than the ancestral strain. It also seems that once it reaches the peak, the viral load remains high and does not decrease as in the ancestral strain. It actually looks like that the viral load in the case of Delta has a plateau. It also seems that the onset of symptoms in Delta infected individuals is slightly delayed compared to the onset of symptoms in the ancestral strain. It takes about 6 days for patients to show symptoms in the case of Delta compared to about, as we mentioned, 5 days in the ancestral strain. This makes it possible for people to spread Delta unknowingly while feeling well and showing no symptoms. In fact, most recent studies have suggested that 74% of transmission occurs before showing symptoms. This number is substantially larger than what was reported earlier for the ancestral strain. Surprisingly, the viral load for Delta continues to be high for days after symptom onset. This extended plateau suggests that Delta patients shed much more virus than patients with the ancestral strain. This is why Delta is so contagious. And this is one reason why masks are so important. They're actually more important now than ever to reduce virus shedding into shared air. It also explains why it's so important to isolate and quarantine immediately after feeling symptoms, even if you are vaccinated. If you don't do that, you put many more people at risk of infections, including unvaccinated children. The virus has definitely stepped up its game with Delta, and so should we. So here are a few tips that we can all work on in order to curb the spread of Delta. Please get vaccinated if you can. Wear a well-fitted mask. Test regularly if unvaccinated, ideally every other day. Test after exposure if vaccinated, because vaccinated people might get infected with Delta and can transmit the virus if they get infected. Also, quarantine and test immediately if felt symptoms, irrespective of vaccination. Thank you.